and Africa, and a good evening to participants joining from West Coast and East Coast of America. And it's a midnight for some of you all joining from even Latin America. My name is Suchitra, Upare, and I'm the coordinator for the CAFI-SSF network. I welcome you all to the webinar series organized by the FAO supported initiative CAFI-SSF network in association with APRICA, that is the Asia Pacific Rural and Agricultural Credit Association. The theme for today's discussion is guidelines for increasing access of small-scale fisheries to insurance services. So before we proceed to the topic, I would like to give a brief overview of FAO's strategy on fisheries and aquaculture insurance. Capture fisheries and aquaculture operations involve a number of risks arising from the physical environment and the social and economic context in which they are carried out. For fishers and fish farmers who work under harsh conditions and usually lack access to social security schemes, these risks are even more damaging as they pose serious threats to their food security and general well-being. As per FAO estimates, every year, more than 32,000 fishermen and women die during fishing operations across the world, and many more are often exposed to accidents and injuries. Thus, insurance is considered an important tool to protect fisheries and aquaculture investments and practices from these risks. The stakeholders, such as shareholders, investors, enterprises, and financial institutions, in a scenario wherein their financial profitability is more likely to be compromised, are increasingly looking for insurance options to share and cover these risks. While the occurrence of more frequent and intense natural disasters due to climate change has increased government's attention to insurance as a way to ensure the rapid rehabilitation of these sectors without having to provide emergency assistance. Although there is a need, although there is a need for insurance support to face financial risks in the fisheries and aquaculture operations, as well as the rehabilitation of coastal communities following a natural disaster, the provision of insurance for both sectors has not developed to the expectations, especially for the small-scale fisheries sector. The general lack of knowledge of the fisheries and aquaculture business characteristics among insurers, the lack of awareness about the benefits and functioning of insurance among the small-scale sector, and the lack of legal and regulations that promotes insurance for these sectors, as well as the negative past experiences, among others, are some of the few reasons for this kind of situation. Considering the importance of insurance to the sustainable development of the fishery and aquaculture sectors, FAO has taken notable initiatives by publishing 2 world reviews on aquaculture and capture fisheries insurance in 2006 and 2009 respectively. These reviews aimed to provide an overview on the situation of insurance for both fisheries, capture fisheries and aquaculture sector, as well as raise awareness and guide concerned stakeholders in implementing appropriate frameworks for its development. Further to this, in 2009, FAO developed guidelines for increasing access of small-scale fisheries to insurance services in Asia to support the implementation of the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication. These are also commonly called as the SSF guidelines. Some of you all may be aware. They also intend to support the implementation of the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries in terms of promotion and development of measures to facilitate access to insurance coverage in fisheries. These guidelines provided an important next step in the long-standing cooperation between APRICA and FAO in promoting financial services for small-scale fishing communities in Asia Pacific region. In the year 2020, the Blue Finance Guidance Notes prepared under FAO's Blue Growth Transformation Initiative were published, under which 2 insurance guidance notes were published. One of them is brochures on insurance for small-scale fisheries, and the other is insurance for small-scale aquaculture producers. These brochures aim to provide governments, private and public stakeholders with information, resources, and concrete pathways for provision of insurance services to support blue growth transitions at local, national, regional, and global scales. The recent assessment study for capacity building needs of insurance service stakeholders in Africa and in Philippines is also supported by the FAO. The global network for capacity building to increase access of small-scale fisheries to financial services is also initiated by FAO in partnership with Africa and Africa for enhancing capacity of stakeholders for provision of financial and insurance services to small-scale fisheries. This webinar is an effort towards promoting insurance services for the small-scale sector. Once again, I welcome you all to the webinar. And now I would like to introduce our eminent speaker for today, Dr. Uwe Tietze. So just to give you all a brief introduction about Dr. Tietze. Dr. Tietze has a PhD in economics and social sciences with a summa laude from the University of Kassel, Germany, and a Master's of Science in Economics and Social Science. Dr. Uwe has worked for 25 years with the Fisheries and Aquaculture Department of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations as a fisheries economist. He has advised to governments, research and academic institutions, and fishery industries on formulation and implementation of social and economic policies and programs in support of poverty alleviation in coastal and small-scale fishing communities, and introduction of responsible fisheries and aquaculture practices and sustainable livelihoods. The economic and social analysis of fishery and aquaculture policies and management and provision of socioeconomic inputs for the implementation of the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries too. He has been a technical secretary, organizer, and a resource person of national, regional, global workshops and seminars held in East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, South Pacific, West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, and the Caribbean. He was instrumental in formulation and backstopping of several FAO field projects in countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Yemen, Eritrea, Tanzania, Cameroon, and a few other countries. Dr. Uwe has also been an author and co-author of major FAO and scientific publications, including contributions to the biannual FAO State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture publication, the United Nations Fisheries and Aquaculture Asia Atlas, and the Ocean Yearbook, that is the FAO Fisheries Technical Papers, Reports, and Circulars and articles in scientific journals, as well as book publications. Dr. Uwe took retirement in October 2005, and thereafter he has been consistently working as an international consultant for FAO, World Bank, regional fisheries management and development organizations, and also with Africa. He's a member of the World Wildlife Fund, World Bank Global Think Tank on Sustainable Fisheries Management in the ABNG, that is the areas beyond national jurisdiction, and also for the conservation of biodiversity. So Dr. Tietze, it's over to you.
Thank you, Suchitra, for this very kind introduction. And to all the participants, I would like to say good morning, evening, or afternoon to everybody. Before I start, I would like to say a few words about the importance of small-scale fisheries. The small-scale fisheries sector employs approximately 50 million fishers, mostly from developing countries and most of them living in Asia. Nearly half of the world's total fish production originates from small-scale fisheries. In addition to direct employment in fish capture and aquaculture, small-scale fisheries provide employment for millions more working in fisheries-related activities, such as fish processing and marketing, boat building and net making. Maybe the next slide. The guidelines, they have three parts. The first part explains the purpose and the background and context of the guidelines, including international instruments such as the Small-Scale Fishery Guideline and the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, global reviews of capture fisheries insurance, as well as socioeconomic and technical characteristics of small-scale fisheries. Maybe the next one, please. Part 2 of the guidelines elaborates on the framework, and this includes major risks and consequences faced by fishers, reasons why most fishers are presently not insured, components of an enabling environment for introduction of fisheries insurance, as well as options for providing insurance. Already Suchitra mentioned reasons why presently most small-scale fisher are not insured. These include low awareness of insurance needs and advantages, lack of insurance providers that are active in their community or at the landing site or fishing port. Currently available insurance policies, premiums are considered too high and coverage is considered inadequate. Insurance policies and settlement of insurance claims are neither understood nor trusted, partly because of low literacy levels. And most fishers do not have access to other financial services, such as checking or saving accounts in banks, to facilitate payments of premiums and insurance payout. A recent study in the Caribbean showed that, at least in the Eastern Caribbean, that just only like 3% of all fishing assets, fishing boats, are insured, while health insurance coverage and life insurance is higher, but insurance of fishing assets is not very widespread at all. Part 3 of the guidelines, if we could go to the next slide, provides guidance on the design and implementation of small-scale fisheries insurance programs. It also contains annexes which have sample forms and procedures, applications for insurance, vessel operator questionnaire, and marine claims procedures. So now I shall explain about part 1, which is purpose, background, and context. If we could go to the next slide, please. The next one, please. So the purpose of the guidelines is to increase awareness about the needs of small-scale fishers for better risk management, also to guide policy and decision makers in the Asia-Pacific region and elsewhere to help introduce insurance facilities and services to small-scale fishers, to build capacity among insurance providers, fisher folk organizations, NGOs, and concerned government agencies, and to promote insurance services that incentivize and reward a responsible and sustainable conduct of fishing operations and a better preparedness for natural disasters, including climate change-related challenges. And this part of insurance services, I like to highlight, is very important, that it should incentivize and reward a responsible and sustainable conduct of fishing operations. Then the next slide, please. And one more. So the risks and consequences faced by fishers, the major risks are capsizing, grounding, collision, and sinking of vessels, fire, injury or death of crew, oil spills and other pollution caused by fishing vessels, theft and vandalism, piracy and crime, as well as storms and other natural disasters. The consequences of these events are damage or loss of vessel and gear, financial obligations to provide compensation to third parties, loss of life or disability, loss of income and employment, as well as destruction of fish habitats. The next slide, please. The guidelines also elaborate on various options for providing insurance to small-scale fisheries. These include traditional insurance, a partner-agent model, mutual insurance, community and cooperative-based insurance, and parametric insurance. If we could go to the next slide, please. And the guidelines discuss advantages and disadvantages and where these different types of approaches might work. Now I'd like to come to part 3, design implementation of small-scale fisheries insurance programs. The next slide, please. And the next one. And this is the main emphasis of the guideline is this part 3, to really build capacity of how to design and implement insurance programs which could work in the context of small-scale fisheries. The first phase is the preparation phase, and this includes an assessment of the economic and financial performance of the fishing industry to be insured and of its ecological and environmental viability and sustainability. Without understanding the economic and financial performance and the ecological and environmental viability and sustainability, insurance programs should not be offered, and they can't be designed properly. Another step in the preparation is the market assessment for the provision of insurance services, including an assessment of needs and opportunities. And this needs to be done with reference to particular segments of the fishing industry and of the geographic coverage. These are very important steps if the insurance program should work. Another thing is the identification of complementary actions to make insurance services viable and sustainable. This includes actions for a sustainable use and management of aquatic resources, actions for providing health insurance, social security, and social welfare, and also an assessment of the specific risks with regard to the assets to be insured, including climate change related risks. The last step in the preparatory phase is the determination of the cost of insurance services and premiums. Now, the next slide, please. So this was a preparatory phase. Now we come to the implementation phase. And this includes establishments of proper procedures for evaluating insurance applications. And they should be not too complicated, but they should be meaningful. The next step in the implementation is procedures to establish procedures for adjusting and settling insurance claims. Another step is procedures for monitoring the performance and impact of the insurance program and to identify challenges and opportunities. This is very important to monitor, continuously monitor the performance and impact of the insurance program. Another step in the implementation phase is the assessment of the impact and success of the insurance program in terms of increasing the economic productivity of the insured and their socioeconomic well-being, and also of promoting safer and more responsible fishing operations. That's why many insurance programs, they are mutual insurance programs where those insured, they are members, and they also make sure that the members, they really conduct their fishing operations in a responsible way. This is a very important element of insurance. Now the next slide, please. So what should the insurance policy, what should it cover? Very important is a third-party liability, also called protection and indemnity coverage. And this provides coverage for legal obligations to third parties. This legal liability typically arises from injury, loss of life, or damage to another's vessels or other property as a result of the operation of a fishing vessel. Liability coverage is also available for legal defense costs if a legal action is brought against the owner of a vessel that causes damage to another vessel. The next one, please. Then the insurance policy should also cover hull and machinery of a fishing vessel and provides coverage for the damage to and loss of a hull of a vessel, attached and unattached equipment and belongings. It is important to note, however, that the owner of a vessel is responsible for properly maintaining and operating the vessel and properly mooring the vessel, and that normal wear and tear is typically excluded. The next one, please. Other coverage includes fishing nets and fishing gear. And also important, vessel disposal and pollution liability. And this coverage provides liability to pay for removing and disposing of the wreckage when a vessel sinks offshore or in a waterway and related cleanup expenses. Another important coverage of insurance should be medical payments coverage in case of crew injury or illness. And now the next slide, please. Thank you. The guidelines also elaborate on factors that determine the cost of fishing vessel insurance and insurance premiums. The most important factor is the value of the fishing vessel, and the guidelines elaborate how that can be assessed under different circumstances. The value of the fishing vessel is mainly determined by length, beam, draft, and age of the vessel, type and horsepower and fuel of engine, the location of where the vessel is moored and seasonal changes of the mooring location, the area of navigation of the vessel, and also of the claims history of the owner and of the navigator. I like to conclude my presentation just to highlight why insurance is so important for a sustainable development and management of small-scale fisheries. And the answer is risk management. For a sustainable management and development of small-scale fisheries, a proper management of risks within the sector through adequate insurance services is necessary. This is needed to protect the livelihood, lives, health, and the productive and other assets of fisherfolk. This would also go a long way to motivate fisherfolk to actively participate in the management and conservation of fisheries resources and the aquatic environment. Thank you very much for your attention. And questions are very welcome. This is myself and my small sport fishing boat.
Thank you, Dr. Tietze, for giving such a detailed guideline for insurance services. And now the forum is open for any questions.
There should certainly be some questions or clarifications. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Dr. Prasun? Yes.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah. So, no, you in the last slide you were talking about the risk management, and we are grappling with this risk management in the financial institutions since long. And definitely, insurance is a part of that. But what actually, we have seen since last 30 years, that insurance as a single product for the small-scale fishers or small-scale farmers are not very attractive. So what we suggested in many of our forum, that whether insurance can be clubbed with or bundled with the credit products. So that will give us more leveraging points for having a common or joint program of insurance and the credit. So credit and insurance should go hand in hand. And this type of program has shown little success in some of the some countries in Asia. But unfortunately, this is not a general acceptance. There is no general acceptance of this in the banking system. Now, the question here is that when we provide a lending or a credit to these small scale fishers or a small boat owners, how we can ensure the activity. I'm not talking about the health insurance or the insurance of the asset. I'm talking about the activity insurance. Whether there can be any kind of insurance which will have a activity insurance means that my economic activity will be insured for this purpose, and I as a borrower will be risk proof by this kind of insurance. Thank you.
I fully agree. I mentioned that there's a need for complementary actions, and insurance alone is probably not attractive. I mentioned even with the assessments, to have even insurance to work, there need to be a proper assessment of the economic and financial performance and the environmental sustainability. This is needed for banks as well as for insurance companies and also for other services. So I fully support your point. And that's why there are, like in small scale fisheries, the percentage of people who are insured, as I mentioned from the example of the Eastern Caribbean, is very low. Even so in the Eastern Caribbean, there are traditional insurance companies, they are working there. And but even then, there are these gaps between the two sectors. And that is why it's important that it's not just insurance, but it's also that they have access to finance. They have to have bank accounts in a bank there. Insurance alone will find it very difficult. Other examples, I mentioned this model of mutual insurance, like where also, like even where I live in the Northwest, the only successful thing here, it's mutual insurance. They're small, more medium-sized vessels. So the owner, they're all member of the insurance. It's like a cooperative, and they themselves, they help each other in case of emergency. They themselves help themselves also in assessing the value of vessels, because there can be a lot of misuse of programs when people give a wrong assessment. They have an old vessel, give a certain value, and that is not the case. So this is really important, that insurance is seen as a part of a larger parcel, where also all the agencies work together, like bank, fisheries administration. Insurance alone, except for cases of mutual insurance, also in Europe, has very difficult to really make an inroad and has good results. And any insurance program which is a failure soon doesn't encourage anyone else to want to go into this sector.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's why APACA's role is very important in this. Yeah, but without the banks or financial institutions getting also involved, for one doing it alone, banks without insurance is not good. Insurance without financial institution, it's neither good. And overall, it's important that there is a good management of the fisheries. Otherwise, if the economic results are not very good, there's no point in giving credit or insuring something which makes a loss. Yeah, that's just my personal observation. Yeah.
No, that's correct. Actually, we have some experiences in Nepal on this bundled product, insurance and credit, with the economic performance. So in that case, but unfortunately, we do not have any this kind of national level program in any other countries in Asia. So we are really interested to launch or maybe some piloting this type of work. So we are working closely with with one of or two of our member institutions to launch this type of a national level program as a pilot. Let's see.
It is very good to hear.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I would just recommend these guidelines, they are available on the internet, just to go through them in detail. And also to this review, which will be dealt with after my presentation, the global review of fisheries and aquaculture insurance, which highlights really recommendations. What is the present status and what could be done to improve it?
Okay. Okay. So if there are no more questions, as suggested by Dr. Tietze, we'll be sharing these guidelines and the insurance review documents post the webinar with all the participants. So then we will move on to the, and if you still have more questions, feel free to write to us, and we will also share those questions with Dr. Uwe accordingly.
You could please forward it to me. I will attend to it. Yes.
Sure. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Tietze, once again for the detailed guidelines and sharing your experiences. So now we will move on to the next session, which is the regional reviews of the current state of insurance of capture and aquaculture fisheries, which is again an important part of this webinar today. And we have about five regional presentations and one country chapter that we have. So it's a packed session that we have, and we have our distinguished and eminent speakers also who have joined us from various regions. So to just quickly give a background about this FAO current study. So FAO, as Dr. Tietze has also mentioned, FAO has published the Global Capture Fisheries and Aquaculture Insurance Review reports way back in 2006 and 2009. But much has changed in the fisheries and aquaculture sectors, as well as in the insurance industry worldwide. So again, in a decade's time, in 2019, the capture fisheries and aquaculture production, according to the FAO estimates of the SOFI data, there has been an unprecedented record of 179 million tons, with almost half of the production came from the aquaculture industry. Aquaculture has met expectations and has also become one of the fastest growing animal food producing sector as a source of food fish in the world. And it has surpassed the capture fisheries production also. In terms of employment, an estimated 59 million people are now currently engaged in the primary sector of capture and aquaculture. And most of them continue to come from the small scale sector from the developing countries. While the status of marine fisheries resources has continued to decline, but aquaculture, as you can see, is steadily increasing. In respect to the insurance industry, globalization and the increased opening of the international market has also allowed reinsurance and insurance companies to operate in a wider set of countries, while technology transfer and innovation, as well as experienced gain in risk management in fishing and aquaculture operations, have also influenced the way insurance is offered and managed in these industries. In view of these advancements, FAO decided to carry out a review to provide an updated overview of the current state of insurance for the capture fisheries and aquaculture sectors, with greater focus on analyzing the changes in the industry over the past 10 years. Through this review, FAO intends to guide decision makers in the formulation and implementation of appropriate policies, legal and regulatory framework to increase access of insurance for these sectors. Also, it plans to promote within the insurance industry the implementation of best practices and sound schemes that meet the particular business characteristics of the fisheries and aquaculture industries. And also to finally raise awareness among stakeholders involved about the role of insurance in the development of these sectors and provide insights on how to join efforts to increase its access. The methodology that was followed for the national and regional report is based on the extensive desk review and research, and it was also complemented by responses to an online survey that was conducted by the FAO way back in 2020 during the month of June, July. Some of the consultants who were a part of this review, they have also held informal interviews with experts from the insurance industry, with the government representatives involved in fisheries finance to complement the information collected. The online survey was targeted at insurers, reinsurers, as well as brokers, surveyors, and risk assessors involved in the fisheries and the aquaculture insurance business from the countries that were covered in this review. The survey covered 30 countries as a part of this study. Now, we will proceed to the first regional presentation, that is by the Africa Regional Consultant on Fisheries Insurance and Aquaculture Insurance. So I would like to introduce Mr. David Japp. Mr. Japp is a fisheries scientist with an undergraduate degree in zoology and oceanography and postgraduate degree in fisheries sciences. Presently, he's the director of Capricorn Fisheries Monitoring, CAFI in South Africa. And he's working extensively in the fisheries in South Africa, as well as regionally and internationally for the past 30 years. Mr. Japp has retained an intimate knowledge of all aspects of the demersal and other fisheries, including technical aspects related to fleet design, operations, and economics. He has authored many fisheries-related papers, as well as numerous technical reports for the FAO. Mr. Japp has also provided many expert reports for environmental impact assessment relating to fisheries and has an intimate knowledge of Southern African and global fisheries and associated recruitment processes and related environmental characteristics. He also consults to FAO and the World Bank on fisheries-related issues, including high seas guidelines, ecosystem approach to fisheries and project development, appraisal and implementation in the East African and West Indian Ocean regions. So, Mr. David Japp, it's over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I trust you can all see my screen. If you cannot, please let me know, but I'm sharing my screen now. Is that clear, Suchitra?
Yes,
okay.
We can see.
All right. Good morning. My name is Dave Japp, and thank you very much for the introduction. I'm based in Cape Town. I'm probably as far away from most people as you could imagine. I'm, as I say, I'm a fisheries consultant, and I've worked fairly extensively in the African continent, but most of my work is in the southern part of the continent and in East Africa as well. So I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible and try and stick to my 10 minutes. I've tried to follow some of the suggestions by Suchitra to try and keep to that. And so you can see the outline really will be to look at the broadly on the capture and culture fisheries in the region, the insurance market, the gaps and approaches, potential scope for insurance services, with some recommendations and questions. And these are all drawn from the preparation of my paper that I've done for FAO. Africa is a very big continent, as you're aware. I wouldn't say it's any bigger than Asia, for example, but selecting countries for this review was obviously fairly challenging. And what I've shown here is that we selected 5 countries. Egypt, on the Mediterranean and the Red Sea coastline, and then we have Morocco, Nigeria, Namibia, and South Africa. So obviously some of the areas I am more familiar with and other areas I'm less familiar with. But very broadly, it's a very challenging continent. Capture fisheries in the region are very diverse. It is, relatively speaking to global production, fisheries in Africa are relatively small. Perhaps one of the biggest producers in Africa is in fact Morocco, and if you have a look at the production in the continent, you will see that the highest production levels are on the western regions of on the continent, the west coast, where most of the upwelling systems occur. So Morocco really is one of the bigger, more productive areas, 1.5 million tons at least. And then that would be closely followed, or not so closely followed, by Nigeria. And in my own part of the world, South Africa and Namibia, we have a mixture of industrial fisheries and very few small-scale fisheries. Most of the small-scale fisheries are in the tropical areas. So in the East African context, the more you move towards the tropics, the more small-scale fisheries that you will find. So there's this broad split on the African continent between the northern sections around the Mediterranean, the southern sections in South Africa, and then the eastern and the western sides. And also in these areas, it's quite important to realize that we have significant regional management organizations. So you have on the west coast, for example, you have CFO and the Benguela Current Convention. It extends up the west coast all the way up to Morocco. So it's a very diverse continent, and that's the message I really want to get across here, is that the catch is quite diverse. In my own country, in South Africa, we produce probably close to 1 million tons of fish a year. Our neighbors, Namibia, produce probably about half of that. But some of the other countries like Egypt have a very, very diversified fisheries production system. So that's the wild culture fisheries in the African continent, broadly. We at some of the areas, there's a very strong influence of external influence in Africa. We know the tuna fisheries are big. There's vessels that are operating quite broadly in the Western and Atlantic Ocean sides. We also do have some large industrial fisheries. This is an example of a vessel that operates out of South Africa. It's a mackerel vessel, horse mackerel. It has the capability of catching 100, 120 tons of fish. It's very typical of some of the big Russian fisheries, and very typical of the fisheries that operate off the northern western part of the African continent off Morocco. Off Mozambique and in some of the countries around in Angola and towards the tropical areas, we have fairly large shrimp fisheries. Particularly Mozambique has a very big shrimp fishery. Off the continent, we have Madagascar on the eastern side. That's also a big shrimp fishing producing nation. We have large Prasun fisheries. These are vessels that are targeting what we would refer to as small pelagic, sardinellas, the sardines, and that's fairly contributes fairly extensively to fish production or wild capture production on both sides of the continent. In the left-hand side here, this is just an example. I do not know how many people are familiar with it, but in terms of fish production, we should not ignore the African lake systems. Lake Victoria, for example, is a very, very big producer of small fish, small pelagic fish. They have these vessels here, which are these basically, in fact, it's a system that was designed in Zimbabwe or Lake Kariba that produces and catches small pelagic fish. In Lake Victoria, you obviously have the large fishery for Nile perch. But I think that the take-home message here is in terms of fisheries, and it's captured here in Tanzania, where you'll see that it's very extensive small-scale fisheries, boats with a lot of people dependent on it, very primitive systems of discharging fish in most places. So it's often these small-scale fisheries are very simplified. They have difficult landing facilities, and generally ensuring these sort of operations is extremely difficult, and people can't afford it. From a culture point of view, aquaculture is not big on the African continent, with the exception of Egypt. Egypt has a very sophisticated and really moved on in terms of aquaculture production. Nigeria is probably the second largest producer of cultured products and fish products. I think what we need to appreciate really is that a lot of this is freshwater production, impoundments within the continent. So the production really is quite limited and in large cases very unsophisticated. I think one of the major problems, as with most culture systems, but it's particularly bad in the African context, is that it's a water limited continent. Sorry, was somebody trying to intervene there?
No, no, we have muted it.
Okay,
it was not a question.
All right, okay. So commercial aquaculture is, as I said, is dominated by Egypt. It's intensive and it has advanced technology. And there are some specialized high developments in some countries. And I'll give a few examples in my own country, in South Africa. This is an example of mussel rafts that are in impoundments off the Namibian coastline. These are line rafts that are in big impoundments around the coast. The Southern African coastline is not easily used for offshore mariculture facilities, simply because it's exposed and it's rough and there's not many impoundments. Just two more examples here. The one on your top right-hand corner is our rafts in Lake Victoria for tilapia. On the east coast here, for example, there's culture facilities for and growing out of Scylla serrata, which is the mangrove crab. And these are just sort of random examples I've selected. In South Africa, probably one of the most advanced systems are the systems for abalone farming. The abalone farming in South Africa was developed primarily because of the high IUU fishing, the collapse of the abalone industry in our part of the world. And so a very big abalone land-based facility has been developed, and you can see here that this is the extent of this farm, and there are numerous or many of these farms in the southern part of South Africa. We cannot exclude other areas of culture production in East Africa and other parts of the African continent. We, for example, have the production of Artemia. Artemia is used in the culture of in aquaculture extensively in Africa, and so we see this initiative in places as well. There's quite a lot of a production that's associated to culture. For example, here we have kelp farming or seaweed farming, and the seaweed farming is done for the feed that is done provided in the abalone. So that's just a broad view of some of the aquaculture activities in the African context. The insurance market of the region, overall ranking of insurance globally, it's growing in Africa. There's no doubt that that's growing. And in terms of the insurance premiums, it's accounted for in terms of the survey that we undertook, about $6.7 million in 2016. While globally insurance premiums increased by 5% between 2017 and 2018, the African insurance market has remained relatively stable, and the growth rate has been relatively low. So it's lagging behind the global trend. South Africa is by far the leading country in terms of insurance premiums, in the region of 48 or 49 billion US dollars, or about 70% of the whole continent's premium income. And this disparity is largely driven by the scale of the economy. South Africa is a very large economy in the African context, and it is approximately the same as the other economy, which is of equal size, perhaps, is Nigeria.
Mr. Japp,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. We have 3 more minutes.
Okay.
If
I'm
we
gonna
can
go
move on to the focus of gaps to be addressed and recommendations.
Yeah. So insurance gaps in aquaculture can be categorized at 2 broad levels, and as Uwe mentioned, they're either largely those fisheries that are managed or those that are unregulated. In countries such as Egypt, the vessel numbers are high, and there are many, and the insurance is markedly low. Freshwater fisheries production is largely small scale. Part of the problems, as mentioned by Uwe, is that there's increasingly environmental disasters, and so a lot of the underwriting and the insurances are directed in towards areas in oil spills. In summary, aquaculture insurance does not appear to be widely used across the African continent, and the largest gap is almost certainly in the small-scale fisheries and aquaculture systems, most of which are uninsured. So the potential scope for insurance services in Southern Africa, broadly through Africa, there's government-supported aquaculture, but the demand ratio and financing of small aquaculture business is constrained by externalities that include access to insurance. This is the biggest problem, is access to insurance. Foreign vessels, we know they are generally well insured, but there are some specific risks more prevalent in African fisheries. For example, political instability and climate change are very big growing issues in the continent. The recommendations from the work that we've done, that there's increasing demand for safe products. So safety at sea is one of the big issues in the African continent. And the recommendation is that the commercial fisheries should proactively seek better and more comprehensive insurance cover. Given the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries communities and the importance for livelihoods in Africa, governance of fisheries should aim towards protection of these communities to help minimize the risk, very much in the way that Uwe has already outlined. This could be partly mitigated through risk protection, and the current insurance models used by established fisheries and aquaculture industries globally and in parts of Africa are clearly not suitable for small-scale fisheries. So the take-home message is that small-scale fisheries really are very difficult to insure, and the current models are not what I would consider entirely appropriate. So that is it from my point of view. I have a few questions that maybe we could use for a discussion. Insurance is very costly. They are asked if there are any alternative financing mechanisms for these insurers, for these fisheries in Africa. And one last point, perhaps offshore gauge culture, in the sense the way it's developed in Northern Europe, is really not suitable in Africa. And if we do want to do that, we're going to need to find a way to mitigate the risks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Japp, for the excellent overview and addressing and highlighting the gaps of insurance in Africa region. We would like to take any of the questions towards the end. Once we finish all the presentations, that would be better. So whatever questions you all have, please let's park it, and we can have this have a question answer session towards the end. So thank you once again, Mr. David. Now I would like to move to the Asia insurance presentation, which is being presented by me. And a little bit about myself. I have a master's in fisheries management, administration and management from the Central Institute of Fisheries Education. As a fisheries development professional, my area of work is mainly in inclusive financial services, rural credit, fisheries and aquaculture insurance, social and gender equity, training and development. I have worked as an assistant professor in the Fisheries Extension Department in Konkan Agriculture University, Ratnagiri, India, to provide technical training and capacity building programs for fisherfolk organizations and the fisher communities. I was associated with the microfinance strategy unit of IFMR Trust. Now it's called Dwara Trust, and implemented a small-scale fisheries financing program for one of the largest private sector banks in India, that is the ICICI Bank, for its MFI partners in the coastal provinces of Orissa state. It was a UNDP project for East India. I've also been associated with few other organizations, that is GIZ India, for the Rural Financial Institution Program to launch a financial capability toolkit. I've been associated with a public sector company in India, that was WAPCOS, which is the Water and Power Consultancy Services, the Ports and Harbors Division, to assess coastal community needs within the state of Gujarat, and was an adjunct faculty teaching cooperative management and microfinance subjects for postgraduate students. And in the recent years, I have been associated in consulting with the FAO, and I'm being a coordinator in the last 2 years. So I would like to begin my presentation for Asia. Next slide, please. Okay. For the regional report of Asia that has been developed, basically, there were 5 countries that were included in this. The area of the 5 focus countries was Bangladesh, Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, and Vietnam. The countries under review in this study basically are also prone to catastrophic risks and vulnerable to diseases in the fisheries and aquaculture production systems. Taking into consideration particularly Bangladesh, Vietnam, and the Philippines, which are also amongst the most vulnerable countries worldwide to climate change also. Next slide, please. So the overview of Asia for the capture fisheries and aquaculture. As you can see, in the capture fisheries segment, Asia accounts for about 68% of global fishing fleet. This constitutes both the motorized and non-motorized fleets, and it constitutes about 3.4 million fishing vessels which are there. 4 of the top 10 marine capture fishery producers are from Asia. And the countries that have been reviewed under this study, which is Indonesia, which constitutes about 8%, Japan and Vietnam 4%, and Philippines is 2%. Also under capture fisheries, inland capture fishery production of Asia region constitutes about 66% to the total global fish production. In the aquaculture segment, aquaculture production still continues to be largely dominated by the Asian region at about 89% of the total production share. And the Asia share of aquaculture fish production is estimated at about 42%, and this excludes China. It is also in terms of employment, about 85% of the primary sector workers. When we say primary sector, it constitutes both the fisheries and aquaculture sector. This Asia region employs about 85% of them. Next slide, please. So looking at the Asia insurance market, it has been one of the fastest growing market in terms of the gross written premiums, and the growth potential of Asia region is specifically in the liability and agriculture and allied business lines. This also includes capture fisheries and aquaculture. The Asia region has about 32% of premium share in the global this. Both life and non-life insurance markets in Asia is estimated at approximately 5% as per the CARG study report. And the gross premium for non-life is estimated at US dollars 564 billion as per 2018. The insurance penetration in the Asian region is estimated at 2.1%. Next slide, please. Okay, so I would like to give the status of the current insurance scenarios within the regions, which consist of a summary of the 5 countries that we have. So currently, out of the 4 of the 5 countries that were reviewed, except for Bangladesh, all the countries have a capture fisheries program in place. And looking at Japan's national capture fisheries insurance policy, which is also an integral part of the national fishery disaster countermeasure policies. And it aims to provide an equitable level of support to small-scale fishers who experience damages or losses of fishing vessels, catch, equipment, and gears caused by the natural disasters or accidents. Thus, we can see that insurance system guarantees fishers the continuation of their fishing operations. Coming to the Indonesian this scenario, the government of Indonesia has in 2016 passed a law that concerns protection and empowerment of fishermen, fish farmers, and salt farmers. And it is mandatory for the central and local governments to provide, amongst others, the insurance and livelihood protection from risks of natural disasters, climate change, and pollution. Currently, the insurance program in Indonesia is being implemented through a form of synergistic which is between the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, the Financial Services Authority, which is called the OJK, and the Indonesian General Insurance Association, that is the AAUI, along with PT Asuransi Jasa Indonesia, which has been designated as the implement insurance company. It's like a public-private partnership, which is supported by a consortium of 12 insurance companies that is implementing this. Indonesian government has also initiated a program of personal accident insurance for registered fishermen, and the premium is paid by Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. Further, looking at the Philippines scenario, Philippines insurance program reflects wide coverage against losses from damage to fishing vessels, equipments, and machinery, besides covering on onboard crew members and fishers and extending the coverage to members of the respective households too. Coming to the scenario in Japan, the three-tier insurance system in Japan is a mechanism which has proved to be successful in terms of coverage, efficiency, and complexity. The mutual fisheries insurance model, wherein fishers and fish farmers need to be members of fisher associations to avail insurance coverage with support from government subsidies. This has been one of the successful models, and it can also be replicated in other countries. Another thing that has been observed in the study review amongst the 5 countries, in all countries under review, traditional indemnity-based insurance models dominate the insurance market. Philippines is the only country which has recently begun to provide index-based insurance and reinsurance policies for fishery and aquaculture systems. This type of scheme links payments to independently established data, such as the rainfall, wind speed, temperature, typhoons, cyclones, and the historical yield data as events to release payments and compensation to affected. That was observed within the Asia region, and that is also relevant for underwriting, is the gradually evolving demand for and distribution of micro insurance policies for the fishers and fish farmers. So in Indonesia, the government has introduced micro insurance policies for small scale aquaculture and implemented it through the main insurance company and the consortium companies that are rolling it out. While in the Philippines, it was observed that the Mutual Benefits Association, which has about 7.3 million members, as per the 2018 data, that was it has issued premiums to about close to 11 billion Philippine peso. And Philippines is in the Asian region. Philippines is fast becoming a model for micro insurance in Asia, with about 28.5% of population that has been covered by micro policies. The segregated data for small scale fishers policies was not available clearly. So then taking into consideration a quick this about other than all the other countries, Bangladesh still does not have fisheries, capture fisheries or aquaculture insurance policies, but it has an overall policy which has been drafted, and it ensures that all insurers in the country are obliged to underwrite a minimum percentage of their business to the crop, livestock, poultry, and fisheries sector. Also, the non-life insurers, it is mandatory that they must write policies for a minimum of 0.1% of their gross written premiums for the rural and social sectors. As I just mentioned, in terms of Japan, certainly the government of Japan plays a major role in the fisheries insurance market and the subsidized insurance premiums that are paid. Also, the insurance premiums that are paid for the fishing vessels are also categorized based on the different segments. And then further, fishery insurance, as I said, is offered through a mutual insurance system in Japan that covers capture fishing sector, aquaculture, hatchery and breeding units, and the fishery related facilities that are observed. Next slide, please. Okay. And over here, just to mention about Vietnam, the insurance market in Vietnam has been transformed in the last 1 decade. So which was primarily a state-owned monopolistic sector. It has opened up more as an industry, both for the domestic and the foreign, for the private players as well as the foreign entrants. And the government is also supporting the aquaculture insurance policies, and there is increased funding for subsidies to cover the insurance premiums in Vietnam. With respect to Philippines, I've already mentioned a couple of good initiatives that they have taken. But in the recent years, in the last decade, the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation which has about 7 lines of insurance, and from 2011 onwards, they have also introduced the fisheries insurance as a part of their segment. And already mentioned about Indonesia. So we can move on to the next slide, please. I would like to highlight the opportunities for insurers, basically. In capture fisheries, as you can see, the data we have is about 4.56 million vessels, which consists of the world fishing fleet. And the 5 countries that were reviewed that cumulatively account for about 1.4 million fishing vessels. This is as per FAO 2018 data. So there's clearly an opportunity for private players as well as new entrant insurers to provide services for the capture fisheries segment. And for the aquaculture portfolio, which is certainly an expanding line of business for the insurers. And also Philippines, as I mentioned, has recently also begun to provide index-based insurance and directly to the fishers and fish farmers. And similarly, it can be adopted by countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Bangladesh too, which have a sizable small-scale fisher population. Next slide. Okay. Coming to the recommendations of this, as Dr. Prasun was also mentioning some time back, there needs to be an establishment of direct links between insurance and credit programs so that the insurance cover can also form part of the collateral or for a loan, and the insurance premiums are included in the loan itself. So it's a bundled product that can be rolled out. And it's also a good risk mitigation mechanism for the financial service providers. And it also provides an insulation for the clients. The application of technology for weather-based insurance schemes, satellite data and inputs from weather stations can also be used to trigger insurance payments in case of occurrence of weather-related. And this can be extended both to capture and culture fisheries sector in order to increase efficiency and also to simplify procedures. There's also a need for more awareness training and networking support from national and international organizations for fisheries insurance, to promote fisheries insurance amongst the small scale fishers. In terms of flexibility in insurance premium payments and claim settlements, that needs to be introduced, because through installments, partial damage, coverage of fishing, production units, and augmented products with coverage on fishing gear. Particularly in capture fisheries, there is no certainty of fish catch in every month. So there should be a flexibility of premium payments that should be allowed depending on the season. So insurance products should also consider including compensation for partial damage of insured units in the purview of insurance claims, with more awareness drives among fish farmers to adhere to the conditions laid down in policies. And finally, I would like to mention that special insurance products for women workers and entrepreneurs should be introduced more, because globally, women constitute about 14% of the total 59.51 million workforce, which is working in the fisheries and aquaculture segment. So people who, so within Asia, women do contribute to a substantial contribution in the small scale fisheries in general. And in recent years, it has been observed that credit support through microfinance by organizing SHGs has also increased women participation, and women are also engaged in various activities like aquaculture, mariculture, fish marketing, processing, and distribution. So there is certainly a special need to develop gender-specific products for women in the sector. So that's it. Thank you. Okay. So if there are any questions, we will take that towards the end, please. Now we will move on to the next presentation for the Europe scenario of the fisheries and aquaculture insurance. So I would like to introduce Dr. Diego Valderrama. Dr. Diego works at the George Mason University. His major goal is in the academic program is to improve the environmental and economic management of living marine resources through the application of economic and social science methods. Dr. Diego's work is largely interdisciplinary and draws from discipline as varied as marine biology, fish ecology, and natural resource economics. Dr. Valderrama has examined the economic and environmental performance of a number of fishers in the US and Latin America, and investigated the production and environmental economics of a broad range of aquaculture species and culture systems around the world. Dr. Valderrama has implemented his research program through academic institutions in the US and Colombia, and he was also an aquaculture officer at the food and at FAO. He regularly engages in consulting assignments for both FAO and the World Bank as an international fishery and aquaculture economist. So Dr. Valderrama, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So very glad to be here. So I was just testing my screen and I think it was working, so I'm gonna share again. So yeah, I have like it's a short presentation about the findings from the study. I think let's go. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, here. So anyway, so following, like a similar format, I think I'll try not to take too much time. So it's a study on Europe. So in the first slide, I have some information about both the capture and the culture industry, aquaculture industry in Europe. So the most important information is that for fisheries, there has been a general decline in production in landings between 2000 and 2018. Landings went from 12.5 to 10.2 million tons. And that's in part because some fish stocks are smaller, there has been some overfishing. And at the same time, there are many regulations that are focused on the rebuilding on stocks. So that's going to place restrictions on the fishery industry. So for the capture fishery industry, the most abundant species, small pelagic fish are very important, like Atlantic herring, blue whiting, Atlantic mackerel, Atlantic cod, and capelin. And then the most important nations for fishing for fishery is Norway, Iceland, and Spain. Now, in contrast, the aquaculture industry is increasing. Between 2000 and 2018, it went from 2 million to 2.9 million tons. Everybody knows, Atlantic salmon is the most important species. It's about 54% of total aquaculture production in Europe. Most production is coming from Norway. Of course, the aquaculture industry is very diversified. There is production of rainbow trout, common carp, sea bream, sea bass in the Mediterranean, blue mussels, oysters. So it's a large number of species. Leading nations: Norway, Spain, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Greece. Okay, so that's just like very briefly, like an overview of both fisheries and aquaculture in Europe. Okay, so regarding the insurance market, so the column of the left is going to be description about fisheries, and on the right, aquaculture. So yeah, I mean, compared to many other regions in the world, the insurance industries are very well established. Okay, so for instance, for fisheries, there are many specialized insurers that provide coverage to the industry throughout Europe. So of course, there are many commercial insurers very well established, like for instance, Lloyd's of London, and many of these insurance providers are members of the European Fishing Vessel Insurance Companies Association. So there is like an umbrella organization that encompasses many of these insurers. In addition to these insurers, like Lloyd's, which is very famous, there are also protection and indemnity clubs. So pretty much it's the difference is that it has like a historical origin. It's just members, of the shipping industry or fishing industry that were not very satisfied with the insurance products provided by Lloyd's, for instance, another commercial insurance. So they decided to create these clubs. It's going to be mutual associations, and then they provide like a wider range of services at lower cost. Okay, and then they became very important. So something also very important about the market is that, of course, there has been a gradual reduction of the fishing fleet in Europe, just because of the policies that I mentioned before addressing overfishing. And then that means that the market is just becoming a little bit smaller. Okay. So just an estimation that was done for this study, just making these assumptions that about 60% of passive gear vessels and around 90% of towed gear vessels carry insurance. We can estimate that more or less there is about 60,000 vessels in Europe that are carrying insurance at this moment. So the coverage is going to be higher for the towed gear vessels, okay, for the vessels that have to drag the gear, okay? So that's fisheries. Regarding aquaculture, most of the growth has been driven by the salmon industry. So it's kind of a very interesting case study because it's an industry that has reached a very high degree of sophistication. So that means that the insurance aquaculture products are very well developed, okay? So Norway is actually the largest market in the world in the industrialized aquaculture segment, $45 million in insurance premiums in 2017. Of course, that's just industrialized aquaculture segment. If you actually talk about the small scale production, so Asia, of course, is going to be like a larger segment. Something interesting is that just because it has become very sophisticated industry, the coverage in Norway for farms is about 100%, okay? And then if you go to other industries, like for instance, sea bass and sea bream in the Mediterranean, it's going to be less than that, but it's also relatively high, something about 50%. So, and then of course, you go to other industries, insurance penetration is going to be much lower. So for instance, shellfish farming, mussels and oysters, okay? So pretty much the reason for this is that both salmon farming and sea bass and sea bream, they actually have reached some degree of industrial consistency, okay? So pretty much, mortality, there is some variation, but this variation is not too much, it's not too large. So that actually makes it very easy for insurance, for the people working in the insurance industry to actually be able to quantify this risk and to spread it about, among the different producers that are going to be part of the industry. So actually that's a major development in Europe. So reaching, for instance, 100% coverage for, for one aquaculture industry is just very important, okay? So regarding insurance gaps and challenges, I just put all the information just in one slide. For instance, for fisheries. So as I mentioned before, so typically commercial insurance companies are going to provide protection to vessels. There is a wide range of perils, but typically if you go to P&I clubs, these policies are going to cover even higher selection of risk. Okay. A major challenge for the industry is that the market is still is shrinking over time. Profit margins are becoming narrower just because there are increasing regulations for fisheries. So it's very difficult for the sector to attract new corporate capital. Okay, so that's the reason. So another reason, of course, is that there is the construction of fishing vessels is not proceeding at the same pace as before. So that means that actually many vessels have to be retired, and the many vessels are becoming very old. So it's going to be more difficult to insure these kind of vessels. Okay, so improved risk management is critical. Okay, and then of course there is the issue of illegal IUU fishing. Okay, so it's becoming just very prominent in the industry. So there is a great risk of reputation. So there are just like new provisions being enforced so that there is less coverage to vessels that are engaged in these practices. Okay, so fishery management, of course, in Europe has become very political. So for instance, the Brexit issue, so that complicates a little bit the insurance industry. And anyway, something that is very important is that there is some government support for premiums. Okay, so there is a special fund in the European Union, the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, and it's able to provide some support to payment of premiums to smaller scale operations. And then regarding aquaculture insurance, even though there has been a lot of growth, and the salmon farming industry has reached like very impressive coverage. When you actually compare aquaculture to agricultural insurance, I mean, there is still, some underperformance. And, the reasons, at least one of the reasons over here. So it's still, compared to the forms of agriculture, there is still a lot of variability in aquaculture. So for instance, there are high frequency losses, like for instance, sea lice problems, or aquaculture operations tend to be exposed to natural disasters or algal blooms. So that's going to be damages that are going to create, that's going to have a high degree of very severe damages, okay? So in many culture systems, there is high mortality. It's going to be lower in salmon or sea bream, but it's going to be higher in other industries. Something is also that aquaculture operations tend to be concentrated. So the risk is going to be concentrated in some locations. And then that makes it very difficult to share the risk or to actually pool the risk. Okay. And then, of course, something that I was revealed in the surveys is that it's still, we have some problems with adverse selection, high moral hazard. That means that, for instance, sometimes just because some producers are getting insurance, so they tend to lower risk management. So that, there is a higher probability of accidents taking place in these operations. The other thing is that, for instance, adverse selection, that means that sometimes when there is risk in some location and then there is a loss of a crop, so that farmer is going to lose insurance. And then anyway, so of course he's supposed to pay higher premiums, but then instead of doing that, he just throws out insurance policy and then he goes and he looks for another provider. So that's still a problem in the industry in Europe, okay? And then of course, what I mentioned before, for many small scale family-run businesses, like for instance, mussel producers, oyster farming producers, coverage is not accessible for them, okay? Just because there is a lot of variability. Many people working in the industry reporting information for the survey, they said that actually they had very bad experiences with these operations. Because, for some years, everything seems to be okay, and then there is a disease outbreak, and then losses could be huge. So that makes it very difficult for them to insure these operations. So it's still, to the European Union, to the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, there is still some coverage that can be provided to these producers. Okay,
Diego.
Yeah.
Last 1 minute. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have here pretty much the last slide. So recommendations. So risk management practices is still, there is room for improvement in the fishing industry to provide, to promote more education. There were, some responses in the surveys. There is still some vessel clauses that actually could be modified to make sure that some outcomes that are not very equitable don't occur. Like for instance, some providers were complaining that they tend to be liable for wages for the repair of vessels, and these wages can be very high. Okay, so the damage can be very small, but wages are going to be very high because the vessel is going to be for a few days under repairs. So actually, some of these outcomes actually, are not very equitable for them. Okay, so actually, some improvement could be done in that way. And then, of course, there is a frequency and intensity of storms that are increasing, so index insurance schemes are being considered. And then finally, for aquaculture, of course, we have this phenomenon in which we have a segment of the industry that is very well developed, and there is still, very little coverage in other sectors of the industry, like shellfish farming. So actually, there are, we need to find ways to enlarge this risk pool of participants in the market. Okay, and there could be like different things that could be done. For instance, in Spain, there is a very good experience with private-public partnerships, in which actually they target the small producers, and these small producers have been able to enter into the insurance market. Okay. So pretty much that would be the review. So I have just 2 questions here. So something interesting in this review in Europe, the drastic differences in coverage between large and small scale producers. Maybe that's something that happens in other regions. And something interesting to know. So how can you actually pull risk for small scale producers? Has this been done in other regions? I mean, that would be like another interesting question. And then I'll stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Diego Valderrama, for the excellent presentation. So we will move on to the next presenter, that is Mr. Timothy Costelloe. He would be doing the presentation for the Oceania region. To introduce Mr. Timothy, he has been an operations manager of the Department of Natural Resources, and he is also the head of service for the Falkland Islands Fisheries Protection Service. Mr. Timothy has worked in a wide variety of roles, both in public and private sectors, with international government organizations, FAO, national governments, and regional fisheries organizations. He became a fisheries officer in New Zealand in 1987 before branching out as a private contractor in 1990, mainly working for fisheries management companies and other primary industry clients as a compliance advisor. In 2008, Timothy relocated to Southeast Asia and operated contracts as an educator, coordinator, director, advisor, copywriter, and business manager across a number of sectors, such as fisheries management, broadcast radio, recording industry. He has also done business startups across the Asia-Pacific region in countries as diverse as Cambodia, Cook Islands, Solomon Islands, Micronesia, and Indonesia. So, Mr. Timothy Costelloe, over to you.
Just had to unmute my microphone first. Thank you very much, Suchitra. This, of course, is the regional report for Oceania. If we could have the next slide, please. Right, so I just want to start my presentation by giving you a map, just to show you the concept of Oceania, because mostly Oceania is unseen on the map because it's such a vast plethora of small islands. So the best way to look at Oceania is actually to look at the EEZs. And you can see by looking at this map that Oceania connects directly to Asia. So in terms of what we're doing here for this webinar today, it's actually directly relevant to the experience that is occurring in Asia, and what is happening in Asia actually has some lessons for some of the emerging nations in the Pacific as well. And I will touch on that in my presentation. Can we have the next slide, please? Right, so the context and the overview, and I'm focusing on small scale fisheries in Oceania because that's the theme of this workshop. So I'm not going to really talk about the large scale industrial fishing in the Pacific. Oceania is the other name for the Pacific Islands countries. So There are 4 larger oceanic countries in the Pacific, which is New Zealand, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Fiji. And then there's another 20 plus economies based on small island states and various states of development. And what I mean by that is some of the countries are very not well developed yet, and exist in isolation from markets. Whereas you have other territories of larger states such as the United States, France, and even the United Kingdom. They still have substantial colonies in the Pacific. So they are way more developed than a lot of the other independent countries in the Pacific. The total contribution to global fisheries and aquaculture from the region is very small. It's in the region of 1.5% for capture fisheries and only 0.25% for aquaculture. So our contribution from Oceania to global fisheries production is small. However, fisheries still account for a significant factor of the economies in most Oceanian nations, with the exception of Australia, where it's much smaller contribution to the economy. It's still one of the largest industries in New Zealand, and it's very much, in many countries, it's 90% of the economy in the Pacific for smaller island nations. And Pacific peoples are also among the highest consumers of seafood products in the world. So the per capita fish consumption is among the highest. So subsistence fishing is a significant part of island life in the Pacific. Many countries rely on it. There are large numbers of coastal fleets from very small boats, very similar in some ways to many of the subsistence fleets that operate in maritime Southeast Asia in places such as the Philippines or Indonesia, a lot of smaller boats. But there's also been a move towards aquaculture development in the region over the last 10 years. And there's been some significant projects in some of the countries such as Solomon Islands and PNG. There's been a significant increase in aquaculture initiatives. We'll come to that in a second as well. In terms of insurance products, the insurance market in Australia and New Zealand is very well developed. So there's good coverage in some territories, and especially the ones that are allied to larger countries such as the United States or France. But there are large gaps in the insurance market across the region. It's vastly underinsured. And the demand for insurance has been relatively static in the region over the last 10 years, based on the fact that insurance is often hard to get as much as anything else. Next slide, please. So in terms of general supply and demand issues, as I mentioned, there's increasing investment in fishing and aquaculture projects and infrastructure, with new aquaculture ventures going on in countries such as Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, French Polynesia, Fiji, and Kiribati. And to the point where especially in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, the employment in small-scale aquaculture has doubled in the last 10 years. So there's a lot more small-scale, basically designed for local markets, but there's also a potential there for export from these aquaculture ventures. So there is some interest from some of the larger Asian countries to invest in the Pacific Islands, especially China. They are interested in investing in aquaculture in the Pacific region for export to China. There are also active aquaculture development policies in New Zealand and Australia. Both governments have set up national aquaculture policies aimed at increasing aquaculture, and both countries want to substantially increase aquaculture. I think in New Zealand, they want to increase it threefold, and in Australia they have a target for they want to increase it substantially as well, I think to double it within the next 10 or 15 years. There was also, at the same time, a development of Pacific Island fishing fleets. Now, there's two aspects to this. Is the large-scale industrial fishing, where some countries are actually investing in larger commercial fishing vessels, but there's also substantial interest and investment going on at a sub-regional level through organizations like the Pacific Community, SPC, to include coastal fishing and subsistence fishers and development for coastal fishers through providing funding and providing assurance and backup, which is something we're going to touch on as well. But overall, as I've said, emerging Oceania is vastly underinsured. So therefore, we could expect an increased demand for insurance services based on the development that's going on in the Pacific. Next slide, please. Right, so as I've said, it's like a tale of two markets. There's the developed Pacific, developed Oceania region, and the market for Australia and New Zealand is well developed, mature, and adequately regulated. It's very closely aligned to the United Kingdom insurance market, to the London market, and it essentially operates as a single market because New Zealand and Australia have a relationship called closer economic relations, which has existed since 1983. So there's very little difference between the two insurance markets, and the products are sold across both sides of the Tasman Sea into both markets from companies based in either country. However, there has been an historical exclusion for fisheries and aquaculture products because of the risk involved. And one of the major issues there is the denial of insurance cover in the startup phase for fishing and aquaculture enterprises. So this leads to the idea that people start up without insurance and they get used to not having insurance. So there is a tendency for most fishers and aquaculture operators to be underinsured across all countries and territories except Australia, which has a very strong insurance culture. New Zealand, not so much, believe it or not. New Zealanders are more risk averse than Australians when it comes to insurance. No, the other way around. Australians are more risk adverse. But New Zealanders tend to take risk on as part of the operating of a business. And there is no regulatory compulsion to be insured. And as I say, there's pockets of insurance, but overall the whole region is underserved with insurance. Next slide, please. Right, so talking about risk aversion, the reluctance of insurers to insure fishing projects, because it's a dangerous occupation. That's already been mentioned, how many people a year die and are injured from fishing operations. So it has high associated risk values. There's also a high failure rate of new ventures, especially in aquaculture. It's a very risky business in terms of project failure and stock failure and all sorts of things if it's not properly controlled. There are a small number of insurers in the region, as I mentioned, dominated by large UK companies. So there is a small pool of insurance that's available, or small pool of providers. They operate through large networks of brokers, but the actual products are limited in number. And as I've mentioned, there's the aversion to aquaculture insurance. And that has led to, rather than full comprehensive cover, there has been, by some companies, just assumption of partial risk. And which means they insure certain aspects of the operation that are less risk than the operation in total. And so that means comprehensive cover can be hard to obtain. And there is overall a systemic aversion to insuring subsistence fishing projects because they tend to be community operated and low value to larger businesses. And there is a cultural aversion that I've noticed in my work and study for this paper that I prepared for FAO, and it's bi-directional, but native peoples in developing countries have an aversion to insurance because they don't think they can afford it. The companies themselves don't tend to market themselves to different sectors of the economy and different groups within the economies. So there's like this bi-directional systemic resistance to insurance that's going on as well. There's something to consider. Next slide, please.
Mr. Costelloe,
Yep.
Last 1 minute we have. If you can just highlight what are the main, what is the main recommendation, since we've already dealt with the gaps, if you can just talk about the main recommendations.
Yep, so that's on my next slide here. So the development of collective insurance schemes to replace insurer aversion. Go back one slide, please. And Māori corporations have been leaders. The Māori fishing corporations in New Zealand, they have self-managed indemnity, which means that they insure it collectively within the industry itself. You've also got government assurance of development projects, like a contingency budget. So the government will provide budget within the operational budget for assurance. There's also in-house indemnity funds from the Pacific Forum Fisheries Agency. They do that by putting aside a contingency fund within the agency. And there's also the collective and cooperative microinsurance schemes, such as the collectivization of smallholders, mutual indemnification through contribution, and fishing associations as vehicles of collective insurance management. Next slide. So the important point is to protect people as well, because people tend to insure equipment and overlook workers and staff. And I think the Philippines mentioned that as well. In New Zealand, Australia, they have no fault injury compensation schemes, but there's little protection for P&I insurance. It's not highly developed in Oceania, and there's very few state-funded employment and injury protection schemes. Next slide, we'll get to the solution. So the recommendations is access to services and reducing the cost. We need to adopt proactive risk management through the use of risk management registers and actions. Adopt risk management as part of the business plan and the standard operating practices of the project. Encourage dialogue between governance bodies, NGOs, and cooperatives to tailor collective solutions for subsistence and small operators. And governments might also consider state-funded insurance or indemnity models. There's also the idea, and this has been developed in Asia primarily, but it applies in the Pacific as well, is to develop cooperative indemnity or assurance schemes within communities or within the same geographical area, including village or corporate structures. Next slide. And that's me, so I'm finished. So there's the questions that that I put down for consideration. There's 4 there.
Right.
Next slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Costelloe, for the excellent presentation. So now we'll move to the next speaker for the South America region Fisheries Capture Insurance. So our next speaker is Ms. Fabiola Espinoza. Fabiola holds a master's degree in environmental science, policy, and management, and is currently a PhD candidate at the Center for Sustainability Studies at Lund University in Sweden. Fabiola has extensive experience in community management, biodiversity conservation, and climate change adaptation. She has worked with the FAO, facilitating the implementation of inclusive financial services in support of SSF sector, and she has almost 5 years of fieldwork experience at National Park Service of Peru as a protected officer, dealing closely with fishing communities and different stakeholders in promoting sustainable fishing practices and marine and coastal conservation. So Fabiola, over to you.
Thank you so much, Suchitra, for your kind words. So yeah, I'm very happy and glad to be here, even though it's super early in here in this part of Europe. And I'm super glad to see that a lot of people joined the seminar. So as Suchitra was saying, today in these few minutes, I would like to share the main highlights of the results from the South America region that we had from the report. I will try to keep it short as well to see the time. So the outline is basically, I'm going to share the information considering the outlines of the previous consultants for this chapter of the report that focused on South America. We focused on Peru and Chile. In Brazil, so in Peru and Chile, we focus to analyze the updates on capture fisheries insurance, and in Brazil, we focus on the aquaculture insurance. So I will be talking about these 3 countries in this presentation. So we're going to give a brief overview about the situation of the capture fisheries and aquaculture production in the region, a quick overview of the insurance market in Latin America, and I will follow on some highlights on some key results that we encountered from the report, and then I will follow to highlight some of the main gaps, and also I would like to highlight what are the initiatives that are being developed in those countries to address gaps in capture fisheries in aquaculture, and finally, I will provide some recommendations. So, yeah, this is a brief overview of the capture and fisheries aquaculture production. So the region's fisheries production has been declined over the last few years in the recent decades, steadily declined. Still, Latin America is considered one of the top producers in the world. In 2018, almost 14% of the global marine land came from Latin America. So the main factors of this downward trend of the fishery production, and that is going to also influence the insurance demand that we will see in the next slides, are the El Niño events. So yeah, El Niño events that turned the ocean water warmer and change the species composition. So the occurrence of the Niño events because of climate change have been more intense and frequent over the last few years in Latin America. That has impacted the fisheries in the area. Also, the implementation of stricter management plans and rules, specifically in Peru and Chile. And while there's issues about overexploitation of resources and illegal catches as well that influence and impact the fisheries production in the region. Still, considering all these circumstances, Peru and Chile continue to be one of the top producers in the region. The region's major producers jointly they provide in 2018 80% of the region land. In terms of I would say that in Latin America, the industrial fishery sector is well established in the region, specifically in Peru and Chile. In terms of aquaculture, although the regions only contribute to around 4% of the world aquaculture production, there has a high rate increase in the rate of agricultural productions in Latin America over the last years. From 2000 to 2017, there has an increase of 6.8% of agricultural production in the region. So Chile remains the region's leading in agricultural production. For 40% of the region total production is provided by Chile, specifically because of the salmon. So the agriculture production in Chile is more kind of industrialized and is the main lead of the region, followed by Brazil. So Brazil has been having a very high increase of the aquaculture production over the last years, has almost doubled the production of aquaculture in the last 10 years, specifically for tilapia. Tilapia nowadays it's still done by small scale farmers, but it's increasingly the production is increasing over the last few years. In terms of the insurance market, just a brief overview, the insurance premiums in the regions are only represent 3% of the global insurance premiums. I'm talking about not only capture fisheries or aquaculture, but health insurance, car insurance, other type of insurance. But however, there has been a positive performance over the last 10 years of the life insurance policy. So more people are taking the life insurance policy and more insurers are coming to provide these services in Latin America. So capture fisheries insurance, and I'm specifically talking about marine and machinery hulls, so insurance of the vessels. It's available in the region for more than 30 years. So it has been available in Peru and Chile for a very long time now, while aquaculture insurance has just started to be developed, with the exception of Chile. As we're going to see in the next slide, in Chile, the aquaculture insurance is established already, but it provides insurance to specifically industrialize aquaculture production. So in 2017, only 28% of the region's aquaculture was insured. Insurance and reinsurance activities are still highly supervised by the insurance regulators of each country, and most of the large fishing and aquaculture companies have already insurance from these providers, or also acquire insurance from abroad from their current companies. And the insurance market regulations, even though the insurance market regulations have been eased over the last few years, is still a bit quite cumbersome to establish new insurance schemes in the regions, as we're going to see in the case of Brazil. So there are a lot of bureaucracy in order for insurance to establish new products, specifically for aquaculture. So just some highlights of the capture fisheries insurance, specifically in Peru and in Chile. So the capture fisheries insurance market in both countries is still largely dominated by a small number of large private insurance companies. So in these two countries, 2 or 3 insurance markets are the ones that provides kind of insurance to fishing vessels. So these few insurance companies account for more than 80% of the premium in these lines of insurance. So we can see that there's a kind of a monopoly there. In large scale industrial fishing, most of them are insured in regards to fishing vessel, like marine and hull insurance. In terms of I'm going to talk about specifically small scale fishing. So a small scale artisanal fishing fleet constitute a large part of the entire fishing fleet in both countries. But over the last 10 years, we have seen that there has been no increase in the number of small scale fishers that has been insured. Just for you to have a sense, the small scale fishing fleet in Peru constitute 90% of the total fishing fleet in the country, which is not currently, most of them are not currently insured. This is the same picture as well in Chile. In Chile, there's around 2,000 or 13,000 small scale fishing boats, but that largely of them are not insured. In terms of aquaculture insurance, in these 3 countries, as I said, in Chile is the country that the aquaculture insurance market is the most well developed. There's no state support for aquaculture underwriting, so most of the insurance is provided by private insurance company, and specifically provided or mostly provided to the salmonids industry. And the main coverage is loss of biomass, but also over the last few years, the provision of protection and indemnity insurance has been increased for agriculture as well. So currently, more than half of the total salmon producing companies are insured, and which is covering more at least 50% of the total production of the salmon biomass in the country. So the factors that has been influenced this continued uptake of insurance is technological innovations and improvement in the risk management practices at the farm level, which has kept the mortality loss very low with an insurable range. Specifically, as I was mentioning, the insurance is provided to the salmon biomass, so the salmon industry, whereas other small scale aquaculture productions is still not insured. So in Chile, it's mostly focused on industrial kind of aquaculture activities. In Brazil, over the last 10 years, as I mentioned, the increase in aquaculture production has been increased over the last 10 years, the aquaculture production, specifically on tilapia, that it remains a small scale. Only one foreign-based insurance company is providing this type of insurance in tilapia. According to the person that runs this insurance company, it has been very difficult to implement this kind of new schemes due to the very tight regulations from the insurance regulators in the country. So it's expected the offerings of insurance is expected to grow over the last few years. However, because of the informality and because of the informality in the activities, and also because of the tilapia farming in Brazil, it still remains a small scale. There are high risk. So this is one of the issues to implement and increase the insurance provision in the area. In Peru, there is still no agricultural insurance available. So more of the large commercial agriculture operations are covered by insurance by an international market. However, the medium and small scale micro enterprises, which is covers 60% of the country's total agricultural area, are still uninsured. So I just wanted, how our insurance gap addressed within the region. I just wanted to share some kind of initiatives that we have discovered that are promoting or trying to promote insurance uptake in these countries in regards to capture fishers insurance and specifically smaller scale. As I was mentioning, in both countries, the majority of larger scale boats, fishing vessels are not insured. In Peru in 2017, the government issued this mandatory insurance for artisanal fisheries, so it's called SOPA. So this was an initiative to promote the mandatory uptake of insurance within the small-scale fishers. Specifically, this insurance was related to risk, death, and injury in case of accidents occurring during operations of these fishers in the sea. So this has been a very good initiative for the government. However, the law has been implemented, but the law has been issued, but it's not implemented due to various considerations. One of them, the most important of them, is the high informality within the small-scale fishing community. So most of the fishers do not have the operation license. It's very difficult to obtain, and also they don't have access to financial, to credits or access to the financial sector. So these issues, besides the insurance companies, although they have experience in providing insurances only for a large scale industrial fishing, so they are not very well known about the characteristics of small scale insurance. So this has been a good initiative, but it still is not implemented because of the issue I just shared. In terms of aquaculture, there's been, in Brazil specifically, there's been the government is trying to support the technological advancement of aquaculture tilapia. Is providing support through loans. So there's having the government is providing subsidizing some loans to small scale fishers for tilapia to increase the technological activities there. Also in Brazil, this is an important step forward for Brazil, that Brazil has this rural insurance premium subsidy program over the last 10 years. And in 2 years ago, it has expanded this program to provide insurance premium subsidies for the aquaculture sector, specifically for tilapia. So it is expected that because of this subsidy program, up to 40% of the aquaculture insurance premium would be covered. And in Peru, I've been talking for the aim of this of drafting this report with some of the government officials, and there has been preliminary discussions to also create a premium subsidy program to increase the uptake of insurance among small and medium agricultural producers. So both of the governments are really taking initiative to provide subsidies to potential insurers. Expand of insurance coverage, specifically in Chile, there has been an increase over the last few years of protection and indemnity insurance for agricultural operation, and this is because Chile, the government in Chile is increasingly providing more strict rules for agricultural operation in terms of environmental activities. So this has been pushed the agriculture industry to get access to the P&I type of insurance. And as well, this is I've been talking with some of the insurers, some of the people that are engaged in the insurance industry, and there has been some initiatives over the last few years to design parametric insurance policies for other species as well, and index-based insurance. But this is still in a very this insurance company are just trying to develop this kind of other type of insurance, not the index-based. What are the opportunities for the insurance services that I see in the region? So in the region, specifically in Peru and Chile, there has been already a great expertise in providing insurance to the fishery sector. So the insurance company have already qualified the STAR risk procedures, and handling claim procedures are in place. However, they would have now to increase this kind of quality of formats, and they have to change it. They have to adapt it to the small scale, which are the ones that are more in need. So in terms of small scale fisheries, there are still in total around 43,000 small scale fishing vessels registered in Peru and Chile that are broadly uninsured. So this is an opportunity to get insurance services, especially including microinsurance to these small scale sectors. But these initiatives should be promoted by the government, but also supported by other kind of schemes or laws to promote the decreasing of informality of the sector, because this is one of the main issues why the insurance is not being the insurance penetration among these small scale fisheries is not good. And also, yeah, so the idea, as other consultants have been also mentioning in their presentation, is the adoption of insurance products to meet the specific need of small scale fishers. And in terms of aquaculture in Brazil, there's a clear opportunity for providing insurance for the small-scale fishers in tilapia. However, one of the main activities that have to be promoted is the increase of technology and to decrease the risk of operation within this area. So one of the main recommendations that also are kind of in line with the recommendations provided by the previous consultants to promote policy and regulatory frameworks for mandatory third-party liability insurance among large-scale fishing operators. That could be another promotion for the insurance company. And promote premium subsidy programs and micro insurance scheme in small-scale fishing communities. This is kind of following the initiative of Peru of trying to provide these subsidy programs, or Peru or Chile trying to provide these subsidy programs specifically for small-scale fishers. Increase efforts to enlarge the risk pool of insurance market serving aquaculture operations as well. So in this sense is to enlarge or to extend the offering of insurance, not only for high demanded species, but other species that are promoted by small scale farmers. Promote innovation and technology of aquaculture operation. As I was mentioning, not only focus on high commercial species, but other species as well. So for example, we can follow the example of Brazil, that they have been providing this kind of loans, or the government is providing subsidies for loans to increase the technology that will decrease the risk of the operations. Yeah, so all these initiatives have to be related to increase awareness on within the small scale fishers or farmers about what are the benefits of insurance, but also increase awareness within the insurance company of how to highlight what would be the benefits for them to provide insurance to the small scales, and also how they have to adapt their products to meet the requirements for the small scale operations. So this is the main recommendations. Yeah, that was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabiola, for the fabulous presentation. Now we'll move to the next presentation. It's a presentation from India Insurance Chapter. So it is presented by Dr. Shinoj Parappurathu. Dr. Shinoj is presently working as a senior scientist in the Socioeconomic Evaluation and Technology Transfer Division of ICAR Center, CMFRI, Cochin, since April 2015. He graduated from Kerala Agriculture University and holds a master's and doctoral degree from the Indian Agriculture Research Institute in Agriculture Economics. He works mainly in the areas of public policy in India's agriculture fisheries sector, with special focus on marketing, price policy, trade, growth, and commodity modeling. So Dr. Shinoj, over to you.
Thank you, Suchitra. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Suchitra, for introducing me. I'm very glad to present the current state of capture fisheries and aquaculture insurance in India. Let me quickly give you a brief overview of India's fisheries sector. The sector is growing at a rate of 8 to 10% over the last few decades, and total fish production was estimated at 14.16 million metric tons during 2019-20, of which about 74% comes from inland and 26% comes from the marine fisheries sector. The inland sector is mostly contributed by the aquaculture sector that produced around 8.3 million metric tons in 2019-20. So over the years, you can see from the figure that the share of marine has been decreasing consistently, whereas the share of inland fish production, mainly aquaculture, has been growing consistently. The fisheries contributes around 1.2% to gross value added of the country. And the sector is also a major employment provider, provides livelihood opportunities for around 28 million people overall. the whole of country. India is a major exporter of fishery products, quantified at about 1.3 million metric tons in 2018-19, which was valued at $6.7 billion US. The capture fisheries is mainly, the mechanized vessels contribute most of the capture fisheries production, about 80% of it, and the rest is contributed by motorized and mechanized sector, whereas aquaculture is mainly dominated by shrimp and carp fish production. Let's see the insurance market, briefly. The Indian insurance industry consists of 58 companies, of which 34 are non-life insurance companies. There are both the public and private companies active in the sector, with an overall insurance penetration of 3.7% and a business of $280 billion US in 2020. The insurance sector in India is growing at a rate of 15 to 20% annually, and non-life insurance constitutes about 25% of the total premiums collected. The major subsectors of non-life insurance includes motor, health, and fire, whereas the marine sector contributes only 2% of the total premiums. There are 5 public insurance companies active in the non-life segment in India, which together contributes around 45% of the premium collected. The government of India operates 3 major schemes in the general insurance sector. So most of the policies are issued through these schemes, which are nationwide schemes. Coming to fisheries insurance per se, there are 4 dominant models how insurance is serviced in the country. The first one is the standalone policies, where the companies themselves directly issue the policies to the beneficiaries or to the customers. Whereas a second model is policies issued under the central or state government schemes in association with the insurance companies. A third one is the schemes of fisher societies or NGOs, which are again serviced by the insurance companies, and the micro insurance run by the NGOs or societies. And a new model has emerged recently, which is the mutual insurance, which is at a very initial stage of development. So depending on the sector and the risk insurable, all these 4 models are present in the Indian fisheries insurance sector. Looking at the major gaps, predominantly only public insurance companies are active in servicing fisheries insurance. In capture fisheries, if you look at, there is very less coverage of vessel insurance. Only 3 to 4% of total vessels in the country are insured, and most of the others are uninsured. The case of gear insurance and coastal asset insurance are actually virtually non-existent in the country. But when it comes to accident insurance of the vessel crew, there is satisfactory coverage in Southwest Coast, mainly in the states of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, but most other coastal states are underinsured in terms of accident insurance policies. The vessel insurance policies compensate mostly in the case of total loss only. Partial loss is generally not considered for compensations. Aquaculture insurance was very successful in the mid-90s and early 2000s, but faced very severe difficulties, constraints because of large-scale disease incidents. And presently, the aquaculture insurance is virtually inaccessible for most farmers, mainly due to high cost as a result of high risk perception by the insurance companies and moral hazards. In mariculture and for covering farm structures, hatcheries, brood bank equipment, machinery, etc., there are no schemes, whether public or private. So that's a major gap there out there. And also there's very less awareness about risk solutions among the stakeholders. There's very limited use of advanced technologies for damage verification and assessment and handling of claims. And micro insurance is a possible solution, but this micro insurance as well as credit linked insurance mostly remain non-starters, except some few success stories in the country. So based on these gaps, as well as an overall assessment of the status of fisheries insurance in the country, we came up, the FAO study came up with a set of recommendations for improving the status. First of all, it is important to move away from one size fits all approach to customized risk solutions that suit specific requirement of the fishers, particularly mindful of the local realities. So there, these community organizations can help a lot. There are several dominant community organizations and non-governmental organizations which are active in the sector, and with their help, insurance coverage in the sector can be improved substantially. The insurance companies also need to collaborate with local agencies and societies such as state government agencies, cooperative societies, farmer networks, aquaculture, etc., for better insurance servicing, for surveys, for claim settlement, and so on. It is also a good idea to recruit a local brigade of insurance agents, as the case of life insurance in India. But so far, in case of general insurance, there are no such systems in place. So it will be good to recruit insurance agents at the grassroots level to enhance the credibility and acceptability of insurance. Legal coercion is another promising option. So we can look for incorporating suitable legislative provisions in state fisheries and central fisheries acts to insist for mandatory insurance coverage. Another possible option is to align the premium payments in accordance with seasonal incomes of fishers, because Indian fishery sector is predominantly small scale oriented, small scale dominated. So fishers' incomes are not steady. So they will be happy only, or they will be ready to opt for insurance schemes only when the premium payments are aligned with their seasonal incomes. So there are some successful models like the multi-effort model in Kerala for credit interest payments. So this can be emulated, and compensation of partial losses can be considered with say additional premium chargeable, new insurance packages for mariculture units, marine inland cages, sea farming, bivalve units, brood bank, hatchery units, CV farming units, etc. can be considered as a priority basis. And as many other speakers noted, India also can think of introducing parametric or index-based insurance schemes that trigger based on climatic thresholds, particularly to cover risks on coastal immovable assets due to extreme weather events. Private insurance companies also may be encouraged. Right now, their participation is very feeble, and maybe possibly through public-private partnerships in ongoing schemes. And technology can be utilized more efficiently for insurance administration, such as space technology, information communication technology, and other technologies like AI, to simplify risk and damage assessment and claim handling procedures. It is also wise to bundle disaster risk insurance packages with existing microcredit schemes and micro savings schemes because of the large network of microfinancing institutions and self-help groups across the country, particularly in the coastal regions. Developing and piloting mutual insurance models would be a promising option, mainly to cover disaster risks of immovable coastal assets in partnership with fishery cooperatives and NGOs and other autonomous bodies. And needless to say, popular campaigns and extension efforts would help a lot to address the general lack of risk financing culture among the Indian fishers. And I end with some questions to ponder over. So the essential, question is how to make the insurance schemes economically viable for insurance companies at the same time, affordable for fishers and fish markets at the same time. And there is a general concern, will risk financing be a liability for fishers, particularly because of growing concerns over profitability and resource depletion? And a third question would be, are mutual insurance and microinsurance promising options for Indian fishers? They indeed have large potential, as shown in other Asian countries and probably African countries as well. But so far, no major successes have been noticed in India. So how are they going to pan out in the future? So thank you very much. Questions are welcome in the next session.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shinoj, for the great presentation. Now, I would like to request all the participants if they can switch on their videos so that we can have a quick photo session. And then thereafter, we will move to the last two important presentations of this webinar. I still don't see some of them. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dugyu.
Okay.
All right. So now we will move to the next talk, which is by Dr. Prasun Kumar Das. He is the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Rural and Agriculture Credit Association. Dr. Prasun has served as a member of international project design teams for IFAD, FAO, World Bank, and other reputed organizations. And he has also led a number of multi-country donors-funded short-term studies and projects. He has also served as a panelist speaker in the international events and has been the organizing secretary of the 6th World Congress on Agriculture Finance. Dr. Prasun holds a doctoral degree in agriculture sciences with a MBA with specialization in financial management and is a certified professional in banking and finance. So Dr. Prasun is going to discuss on APRACA's engagement with the financial service providers in the Asia Pacific region. Dr. Prasun, over to you.
Thank you, Suchitra, for this introduction, and a good morning for some of them are the super good morning, some of you super good evening. So basically, I'm not going to, I don't have a presentation as such, but as requested by Suchitra, I just want to give you some glimpses of what actually APRACA does. And those who don't know APRACA, that this is basically a platform or the association of the members. It was established by FAO long back in 1977, along with two other sister agencies in Africa and Near East and North Africa. So AFRACA, APRACA, and NENARACA. So apart from that, we have our sister concern in Latin America. We call it the ALIDE, and also in Europe, it is SICA. So we are basically the 5 sisters. And sometimes we work together in the World Congress, where we bring our members all together. And next World Congress will be in Mexico in 2022. So in most of these agencies, we generally work closely with the central banking system, as well as systemically important development financial institution, agricultural financial institution, and also some commercial banks. And of late, after the new millennium, we have also added the microfinance as one of our very important component as a member of Upare. So those who know us, that we generally work very closely with the international development partners, specifically with Upare, with FAO, IFAD, and World Bank, as well as our regional development financial institution like ADB for us, AFDB for Africa. So this is our basic. I mean, we also do work with the international agencies like bilaterals, also like IKI, GIZ, sometime with a project kind of work. Apart from that, we also, because it's a association of the financial institutions, so we do engage with them on various project implementation. From the donor-funded project implementation, which is supported by our member institution. I think last 40 years odd, we are mostly focusing on financing to small scale for agriculture and rural enterprises. But I think last 4 to 5 years, thanks to Raymon and his team, definitely Suchitra is a part of that, he introduced this fisheries finance as one, and fortunately our member institutions in 2019 adopted these 2 guidelines as a major guidelines for us for insurance as well as credit delivery system. So as I said, that last 4 to 5 years, we are really and sincerely working towards some kind of engagement with our member institution and the government line departments with that. And, Upare works with the member institutions and development partners, and we do implement projects. And currently we are implementing 2 small projects of FAO in the Philippines and also in Thailand. And the major output of these projects are, we did some preliminary survey which showcase how the credit services or the financial services are working in these 2 countries. And some of the reports are available, and we will be uploading the reports in our website as well as FAO website, and CAFI-SSF also will be circulating this and disseminating this. And some of the interesting findings are already there. The most important finding is that they need the capacity building. The small scale fishers need capacity building, because if you see, as per our observations from the surveys, we found that SSF as defined in Asia, maybe it's different in Europe and in America. We basically, they are a community which are doing it for last 100 years or 3-4 generations. What we found, that there is no new entrants in the system. It means that the economic appreciation of this particular subsector doesn't allow the new entrants into this, because there is no economic benefit of this. So this is one of the major observations, that new entrants are not there. They're all old and generation wise. We call it, somebody was talking about the AI, we call it the ancestral intelligence or ancestral integration. So what we are trying here is that we now, based on our discussions in the executive committee, last executive committee, and also in the General Assembly in March, we decided based on our consensus that as Asia is the home for the majority of SSF, we will be working on 3 major aspects of small scale fishers. The number 1 is strengthening the governance. How to finance strengthening the governance of SSF through empowering the SSF. So one model, I think our colleague from India was talking about the producers group, which is already very, very important in many countries, not only in India, but in Vietnam, in Philippines. So we will be closely working on this particular aspect. So number one. Number two is engaging with the FSPs on to include group insurance for SSF activities. Now, how I don't know, because I'm not an insurance guy, so I don't know how to do the group insurance. But definitely we will be taking the help of the insurance, facilitator who can help us to get a group insurance policies for the small scale fishers and their activity, not for their asset. So that will be a great contribution we are thinking about. And finally, we are trying to establish a SSF finance database, which will be very important for us to take further steps. And we have already started sending the survey to our member institution to understand what is the SSF finance exactly. So for that purpose, we are using the definition because taxonomy in SSF is also different. So we are using the FAO definition for Asia. So we have already sent the survey data sheet to them to understand, and we are trying to build this database, which we will be sharing with all of you. I think I rest here. Thank you very much, and thank Suchitra for inviting me, and many thanks to Raymon for igniting Apraka for working closely on this small scale pieces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prasun, for also bringing out the progressive thoughts and already charting out the important issues. And it's good to know that Africa has already taken initiatives in working towards that. And hope this long-standing association of Africa and the CAFI-SSF network also continues in future. So thank you. Finally, we would like to move to the last presentation of the webinar, and a very interesting presentation. It's on third-party liability insurance in fisheries. It is by Dr. Raymon VanAnrooy. Dr. Raymon has been working with the FAO since 2000 and has been based in Vietnam, Italy, Turkey, Barbados, Belize, and again back in Italy. Since January 2018, he's working at the FAO Fishing Operations and Technology Branch. His main areas of interest and expertise are in fisheries development and investment, techno-economic assessment of fishing fleet performance, safety in fisheries, emergency assistance, fisheries microfinance, credit, and insurance services. So Dr. Raymon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Suchitra. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Good day to everybody. We have been listening to many interesting presentations, regional, national overviews of aquaculture and fisheries insurance the last hours. And also we hear the nice presentation on the guidelines and some insights from Apraka. I'm very pleased with these. Of course, all these presentations, they will come all together in this world review, which we hope still to publish by the end of this year. So keep an eye on your inbox, because we will, as soon as we have it out, we will share it through the CAFI-SSF network, of course, Suchitra. So after all the presentation we have done now, I will take just 5 to maximum 7 minutes for this small presentation, because it has been many hours already for you. And I don't want to make it too long, but this is a very interesting subject. It's a bit more specific. We go more into detail than the overviews that have been provided so far. This is on the subject of third-party liability insurance. So I will first discuss what it covers, then why do fishing vessel owners need it, what are the origins of third-party liability insurance, how it works, are there many fishing vessels covered in Asia, and how to increase the third-party liability coverage in fisheries. So third-party liability insurance has many different forms. variations. The coverage is different in different countries, conditions, and there are exclusions. But sometimes it's also called, it is named protection and indemnity in insurance, as was mentioned by some of the speakers. But the general coverage is for personal injury and death claims, liability towards crew, observers, passengers on board and their luggage, cargo losses and damages, pollutions and wreck removal as required by law, pollution caused by vessels, loss of property, and damage to floating objects, and so on. Floating objects, you could think, for instance, about FATs, fish aggregating devices that are destroyed, or pontoons, nets of others, of course, also. That's so. Each year, worldwide, we see that there are hundreds of thousands of accidents in fisheries. These lead to tens of thousands of fatalities, and many of these fatalities and accidents are in the Asian region, especially also among small and medium-scale fishers. If crew get caught in an accident or there is a collusion, then the owner of the vessel is often liable. What happens if the owner is the owner of a small-scale vessel with not such a lot of money? He cannot compensate the fisher or any other for the accident, for the damage caused by the accident. He may get bankrupt, and the claimant, the one who was damaged, doesn't get anything at the end. So this third-party liability insurance covers this kind of damages for in case of collisions, damage to fishing nets, also sometimes for piracy, but particularly for the crew and observers, their medical cost, cost of personal injuries, illness-related costs, also disability payments, and so. When a vessel makes damage to coral reefs or leaks oil, and there are claims coming from these, this is also covered normally by third-party liability insurance and towage and wreck removal related costs. So what are the origins of third-party liability insurance? These are already pretty old. In the since the 1930s, when there were more and more cars came on the road, more and more accidents happened, and then the governments thought, okay, we have to have some kind of insurance coverage. And the minimum coverage that most of the governments have established by law is to have third-party liability coverage. So if you hit with your car somebody else's car and you damage the other car, then at least the car that you have damaged will the person will get compensated through third-party liability coverage. In the 1960s, it only started in the maritime world. So the trigger was the Torrey Canyon incident, oil spill. And then they started to recognize in the maritime merchant fleets that there are high risks related to maritime transport. Then various international conventions under the IMO were developed, but gradually increased the coverage. For instance, the Bunker Convention, where vessels covered, vessels for the larger than 1,000 tons gross tonnage are required to carry insurance, third-party liability. Then in 2002, the convention also of Athens covered the passengers on board and their luggage, and wreck removal was covered under the Nairobi Convention of 2007. And most countries in the world are member of these. So what I would like to say, these conventions, those countries that have ratified these conventions, and these are most of the countries in Asia, they have applied have made third-party liability compulsory for the merchant fleets. Let's move to the next one. So what happens now, so just to explain a little bit the system. The current situation in small-scale fisheries is often that if an accident occurs, and somebody gets an accident on board or somebody gets injured, then the crew member or somebody else who is damaged doesn't get any compensation, and the fisherman can often not continue either. So it's a big problem. So what can be done? So many governments, especially in Europe, but also, for instance, in Japan, have decided to put it in their legislation that there is a compulsory third-party liability requirement. So what is then done? So they put it in the legislation for fishing vessels of a certain size and up. And they say, okay, you have to have third-party liability insurance if every time when you renew your fishing license. So it is a compulsory requirement. If then an accident occurs and there are injuries or damages, then the claimants can get support from either the insurance or the vessel owner, who gets on his turn can get compensation from the insurer. Let's go to the next one. In the next one, we have here how many fishing vessels are covered in Asia by third-party liability insurance. There's not too many yet. There should be many more. Here you see on the screen that in Asia there are about 2.1 million powered fishing vessels, so fishing vessels that are engine powered. There are another million vessels, fishing vessels, that are use oars or sails to move. So total 3.1 million. Of this 3.1 million, we estimate that between 330,000 to 400,000 have some form of third-party liability insurance in place. So this would be about 15 to 20% of all powered vessels. And of course, we have to recognize that actually among these are mainly the large-scale industrial vessels, the vessels that are carrying observers and vessels that are fishing under RFMO agreements or international waters. So the small-scale fishes are generally not covered. So there's still a lot of work to do. So what do we do normally to increase third-party liability coverage in fisheries, and specifically small-scale fisheries? So one of the first items that we have to deal with is the legislation. If the legislation doesn't require insurance, then there are many fishers that don't take out insurance. They just take the risk. Fishers are by themselves are already risk takers. They go to sea, they go to environments that are very harsh and very dangerous. So they are already risk takers. So they're often not really feeling the need to buy insurance. So we have to think about how can compulsory insurance requirements for merchant shipping be integrated also in fisheries. Often there is already a requirement for larger fishing vessels if you look carefully at the merchant marine, the shipping acts, for instance. But for smaller vessels is not. So that there is some development needed. So that can be done often together with fishing folk organizations, insurers, and authorities to develop the regulations for such insurance. And start maybe with medium and large scale, and then gradually move to smaller scale vessels. Aside from that, it is useful to look into the options for premium subsidies for smaller vessels. There are many premium subsidies for agriculture. In some countries, they are also existing for small scale fisheries and larger scale fisheries, and these should be further extended. And then, of course, in order to make it work for fishing licenses, when they are issued, there should be a requirement for a proof of insurance, similarly as for cars on the road in most countries. So aside from that, of course, it is important to build capacity through development of brochures, training materials, to increase the awareness of the fishers on what are the costs and the benefits for them. Costs are often pretty low, especially, of course, if there are premium subsidies that cover like half of the premiums. And the benefits are substantial, especially for their families and also in terms of medical costs. So many of the fisher folk organizations worldwide are actually in favor of this kind of introduction of third-party liability insurance. And then, of course, as Dr. Prasun already said, and many others, we have to work on the awareness raising also of decision makers to guide the policy and decision makers on this subject. Advocacy is really needed. So there is a lot to do. We are doing this kind of work. We are assisting countries from FVO side with this legislative developments, policy development, awareness raising in various countries, also through the CAFI-SSF network. And the coming years, we will do this much more, especially also in Africa, with an Asia also, if assistance is desired. So we're happy to help. You can find more information about third-party insurance for small-scale fishery in some recent publications that we issued. We will share them also through the link later. By Suchitra will do that, or an email after this this webinar. And for more information, please contact us. Questions are welcome, but I recognize that the time is very short, and we have been a long time together. But you can always write me. I'm happy to respond to any questions. So thank you all very much, and over to you again, Suchitra.
Thank you. Thank you, Raymon, for discussing this important topic, and to also highlight that a lot needs to be done in this area. So with this, if there are any questions from the participants, we can take those questions for the next 5 to 7 minutes. Otherwise, you can also write to us, and accordingly, region-wise, we can forward those questions to the speakers, and they'll be happy to answer that also. So it's over to the participants if there are any specific questions that they have.
As always, I have many questions, but I will keep my questions small and short and very simple. My first question is actually, it came from, in the chat box also, I have seen that our member institution, State Bank of Pakistan, they are asking two very, important question. I think our colleague from India also touched upon this. But we also would like to know, because we are working closely with the financial institution. So insurance product is basically for the insurance companies. So the banks do not have anything to do with the insurance product. Now the question comes that we can engage with the banks to support these insurance companies for their clients. That our member institution can do. But do we have insurance also in our network? If we do, then I have two questions to them. Number one question is that, as our colleague was asking, that for the inland fisheries, no problem, because you know what will be your income and how much you are going to earn out of that. So accordingly, you can fix the premium. But for the catch fishery, like a marine fishery, where the small scale boats, they go and they don't know, because we have seen this in Lombok Island when we are implementing a project with IFAD, that they don't know how much fish they will have. So for them, what will be the insurance premium, how the insurance premium will be decided, whether there will be any annual or historical database based on which they will do it, like what we do in case of weather index insurance. So that is a question to my colleagues from the insurance agencies. So if anybody can provide me some guideline or maybe guidance, then we can start talking with our financial institutions. Thank you.
Okay. A very important question that you have raised, Dr. Prasun. We have within the network some insurance organizations, and I think over here we also have a specialist from Philippines, PCICI perhaps. So I don't know if Mr. Cortina, would you like to take up this question? if not, any other insurers also with expertise can answer, but I'm just checking with Mr. Cortina. I think he has left the meeting. Dr. Prasun, it would be, we would put this question across
I have a comment to make with regard to Dr. Prasun's query.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, this is a suggestion because in India, the penetration of fishery credit is also very less. Now, one of the key reasons, as per our study, is lack of collateral. So, if the insurance companies and these banking institutions can tie up, get into a collaborative mode, and if the credit institutions accept insured vessels as collaterals, particularly in case of to finance vessels, that would be a great advantage because these insured vessels, since they are insured, in case of their loss, they will be compensated. So that can be considered as a collateral. So this is a kind of suggestion which can be considered. So far, I am not aware of any such cases being practiced right now. Maybe in Japan it is there. I've heard of it, but that can, I think, work possibly.
Okay. Thank you, Shinoj.
No, I think that is a good idea. Actually, we also take, we are, I mean, in many countries, including India, we are trying to do the Uberization of the assets in the farming, sector, including the fishery sector. There is a project going on with the Ministry of Agriculture, but I'm also part of that, where they are trying to list out the assets they have, which can be used as a collateral for financing. So maybe it will take another 1 year time to complete the process, and then we will go back to through the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India. But my question is how to characterize the income of a small scale fisher, those who go to the sea for catching the fish. That is a very important question to ask, that while we finance them, we do not have insurance, we do not have guarantee, then why do we finance them? So that's a big question being asked by any banking institution, because it's a public money. So how to get the average income and accordingly fix the insurance premium, so that bank also can, like, for example, in case of many countries, the bank insurance and credit goes together, and they pay the insurance and they get it as a loan also. The insurance amount is also as a loan. For example, in China, they provide loan for the insurance amount. So, but they must know that what will be the income for assessing that. That is the question.
Thank you, Dr. Prasun Das, for sharing on behalf of the State Bank of Pakistan this question. One thing that raised by some of the colleagues, that the asset may be taken as a collateral for the insurance company, but the quality asset to have acceptable for the commercial banks. So it is also a challenge for the small farmers that the collateral that they have is not acceptable to the commercial banks, and it is not viable for the lending.
So I think we have to live with this question for a few more days. Let's see. Yeah.
Just to add, we came across in Africa of some systems that where fishers are providing collateral as a group for each other, and they sign guarantee papers or and provide these to the banks, and that works. But yeah, that is often not for very large amounts. That is for maybe buying as a group, as a they call them there, for instance, in Kenya, beach management units. Buying as a group an outboard engine of a couple of $1,000s, but not for a vessel of $20,000. But it seems to work in some of the countries.
Yes. Now we need to streamline those best practices and disseminate those best practices.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So if there are no further questions, I would, and as Dr. Prasun has said, there are certain questions we can leave it at that, or, and think more about it. So with this, and even if whenever questions arise, please feel free to write to the CAFI-SSF network or Dr. Raymon also. And you can also, I can also forward it to the regional speakers who will be happy to answer, including Dr. Tietze, who has also stated that he'll be happy to answer any of the questions that is there. So with this, I would like to bring a closure to this webinar series on the guidelines for insurance for small-scale fisheries. And I would like to thank all the participants and the speakers who have joined this webinar at different time zones, including some of them at midnight hours. And I would also like to thank Africa for extending their support and cooperation also to the CAFI-SSF network for throughout for our different webinars, and we will continue this association. So with this post the webinar, we'll be sharing all the presentations as well as different publications. Also, we've already shared that in a chat box, but we will also be emailing you all the several publications that could be of interest to all the stakeholders. And it's our endeavor through this webinar, we would like to promote more of insurance services, and as stated by Dr. Prasun, also how characterization of the incomes and how efficiently the services can be, insurance services can be provided to the small scale fishing sector units as well as the communities. So thank you all for joining the session.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Suchitra, everyone.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Bye.
day, evening.
Have a nice
Thank
day.
you,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.